Welcome to Buckets, brought to you by BetMGM, the king of sportsbooks. My name's Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network, and this is your How to Bet the Mavericks / How to Bet the Celtics NBA Finals episode. So the concept today, Brandon Anderson and I talked for, 8-10 hours. It felt like that about the series, and we gave you all sorts of bets that we like. But Brandon and I were also very much in agreement on various things. And if you want like in-depth, detailed X's and O's stuff and various angles, you can listen to that episode. Brandon, Jim, and Joe did props. You can listen to that in this feed. Brandon and I did like a small segment on like legacy implications for this series as well. If you want like just a general sports talk, the very it's not like the dumbest stuff you'll hear. We try and make it smarter, but it is like very general, non-betting stuff. We got that in the feed for you as well. But what I wanted to do, because I do think the series is fascinating, and I do think that there are interesting things to get into about both from a betting perspective and from a basketball perspective. I think people are very split on this series. That's kind of my perception. I do think that it skews certain ways. In the betting community, I think that sharps are on Boston, and I think that the casuals are more on the Mavericks. That doesn't mean that sharp people can't be on the Mavericks. And I have two of those folks with me to join for the start of this episode. Joe Dallaire and Brian Fonseca are going to join me. In the second half of this episode, Michael Fiddle, who's with me on Celtics Island, or it's probably like larger, Celtics Continent, I think is a better like way to put it, who's with me on Celtics Continent. We're going to break down how to bet Celtics, including I'll give out my finals MVP pick on that part of the podcast later on. But even though I am not like we'll get into it. I'm not like, it's going to be Boston. If you bet any other way, it's stupid. I don't think that's how this goes. And for those of you that listen and are just like, Matt, I hear you. The Celtics have all these cool numbers. That's cool. I'm not betting on Jason Tatum versus fucking Luka Doncic. I'm not doing it. And you want to bet Dallas, we're going to talk about that. And I was hopeful to do that with Joe Dallaire and Brian. And Joe was like immediately, as soon as the finals were locked in, was like, Dallas, Dallas, Dallas. And then he talked to Brandon Anderson and Jim Turvey for a week, and now he's wavering like a coward. But hopefully he'll be able to fake it and give you some information here on Dallas and different ways to bet it. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. As a quick reminder, I want to let you know that you should download the Action Network app. It's the best way for you to track your picks. I'm hopeful. I will have this confirmed for tomorrow on Game 1. I think we're going to do Buckets Live at the end of Game 1. So be on the lookout for that. You need to go to actionnetwork.com. or youtube.com/the Action Network. Download the Action Network app and you'll be notified when we go live for Buckets Live. So make sure to check that out. All right, let's do this. Brian Fonseca, Heat sympathizer. That's not relevant here at all. It's not like he would have any sort of animus against the Celtics. And Joe Dallaire is here with me as well. Let's start right here. Brian, we need to clarify for the folks. You have a massive... When did you... Don't extrapolate. Just tell me. When did you bet your Mavericks futures price, and what did you get it at?
Plus 2,300 to win the finals. This probably was in March or something along those lines.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got a massive position, and you've kind of said that like you're not looking to bet a lot. Like I assume you'll bet game to game in this series,
sure,
maybe a little bit, but
stuff,
you're not looking like you're not going to buy in on Mavs plus 180 or whatever they're at in the market. On the series price because you have that prior position, and we want to be transparent about that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't feel the need to do it because unless I was going to hedge with Boston, but that's not why we're doing this today. So,
okay. And then Joe, have you bet Dallas at all?
Yeah, so back in March on Buckets, actually, we talked about it. We were like, what team like could maybe get there? And I grabbed a little bit of Dallas 30-1. It's nothing like significant. I threw a free bet at it. So it's just, it's kind of in the portfolio. My bigger position has honestly been the Atlantic Division to win the NBA Finals. And I wrote about that. So I'm like kind of covered on both ends, but I am trying to treat this finals like coming into it. Like, I don't care really what my other futures are. I'm looking at it right now saying like, is there something that I can do here to like make money on the NBA Finals? So that's kind of the way that I'm treating it. And, if one future hits, the other one doesn't, then like, so be it. But I'm a little bit covered kind of in each way.
We gave out on Buckets Atlantic Division. You came up with that. And then Jim and I were like, yes. And we also gave out Northwest, and the Northwest Division got seeds 1, 2, and 3. and somehow we missed on it, and I'm just
Yeah.
like, okay, all right.
I was gonna bury that one.
Just gonna bury that one in the pit. Mavericks plus 180 right now on the series price. This is not a let's victory lap the tickets that people can't bet episode. I will just say that I can't log it in the app, which is a problem. You can do exactas of X team over X team, and I did have from the weekend before the playoffs when I saw the path that the Mavericks had. I grabbed both Celtics over Mavericks and Mavericks over Celtics.
Oh, you
and the only reason I
dog.
bring this, only reason I bring this up is so that people don't think that I absolutely got destroyed because of how many futures I had on the Minnesota Timberwolves.
And Philly.
That
Philly was
yeah,
another big one.
Oh, fucking.
That's
Knicks.
evergreen. That's evergreen
Oh,
right
the
there.
Knicks.
That quote.
If Embiid were healthy, we would
If
win.
Embiid were healthy, yeah, I'm gonna remember that for next year. We're gonna talk about that in another episode. But let's start here right now. Brian, you do think that? I just want to start right here. Do you think the Mavericks are going to win this series? Like beyond the betting perspective, let's just talk like we're on First Take. God help us. Do you think that the Dallas Mavericks are winning this series?
I at least think they can.
Okay. All right. Joe, do you think the Dallas Mavericks are winning the series?
Yeah, I think they can. I don't think that they all. I'm going to say like I think it's less likely that they do, but I mean I think that's the way the price is, right?
Right. And so like this is where the conversation does get interesting because like we were going back and forth on it in Slack, and Brian eventually was like, "Why are we getting into the weeds on price here?" And I was like, "Because that's everything for what we're talking about." And I think that a lot of this gets into the simple fact of Brian, how much of this is, in your opinion, that the Mavericks are underrated, and how much of it is that the Boston Celtics are overrated? It can be both. I need a split here of 100%, 60-40, 40-60, like whatever that is. What is the split here for how much of your perception on the series of the chances for Dallas? How much of it is you think Dallas is underrated versus how much of it do you think Boston is overrated?
I almost want to go 50-50, but if you had to point, like if I had to like tilt it 55-45, I would probably say 55 Celtics being slightly overrated.
Okay.
45 Dallas.
So I like this because I had you on how to bet the Mavericks, and your answers have been they can win, and it's 50-50. Good stuff here, Brian. Good stuff here. So
no. But 50-50 in terms of like you're asking whether or not I do think the Celtics team is overrated. I've told you that.
Yes.
Like
yeah,
I 1000% think that is the case. But I also think Dallas is underrated, so that's why I'm like kind of splitting the baby there in terms of what do I think is most important here.
Right. So let's do. We don't. There are ways that, and we've talked about on the show before about how to build a model, and you can extrapolate all that out and build yourself like a projection on what the number is. I'm asking you to eyeball test this. What do you think? You said the Mavericks can win. Give me what you think the implied probability for Dallas should be in the series. I'm not going to hold you to it not being exact. I am just asking you for a guesstimate of what do you think Dallas's chances are for winning the series.
Well, for one, I still think Boston should be favored.
Okay.
Like I'm not like they are the better team, but
I hear you.
In terms of implied probability, I mean 60-40.
Okay. See, that's fair because what we're looking at here is the implied probability for Boston at minus 225 at BetMGM is 69%.
Okay.
Right.
It would make sense that I'm a little bit under that.
Yeah. Right. And you're saying that it's closer to 60, and that would be minus 150. And so you're getting like this is a very
price I actually thought of when you post the question in the Slack.
Right. So now we kind of know like what the differential here is in terms of the value, because by putting them at 60%, now we're saying that you're getting a 9% bump and you're getting 75 cents on the series price. Like that means that there's value on Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a completely fair position to have. If you do the work and you're just like, do I think that Boston wins? Yes. Do I think that it's going to be closer than what the numbers of, do I think it's under 16? Because that's really, when we talk about this, that's all that you really need is for the bet to have value at its core. You need for your implied probability to be underneath that. Yeah. The question that I have, and let me go with this with Joe too. Joe, what do you think the implied probability should be for Dallas?
I thought it should have been closer to like under 30%, maybe like 25. And that's why I'm struggling with this. Cause like I wanted to bet Dallas. I wanted the number to come out. And like, it's actually funny because the way that you posed the question to Brian about Boston being overrated, Dallas being underrated, I actually think it's the opposite. I think Boston is being underrated and Dallas is being overrated specifically because of Luka Doncic, I think, because like he's the best player in the series. Everybody knows it. Like, I don't really think it's even a debatable thing outside of the Boston area, right? Like outside of them, like I don't think that there's really a debate that Luka is the best player in the series. Like Luka is conversation for best player in the world.
Not even in Boston.
You know?
I don't think Boston. I think only the most hardcore blind Boston fans.
Okay,
I think if you talk to like if you look at like the blogs and podcasts, right? Let's talk about like the informed fan base. I think most of them would tell you that Luka Doncic is the best player in the series.
Yeah. And I think that that's why, to me, the price is the way that it is, because you're getting a lot of people that are coming in saying like, well, they got Luka. Like, I want to bet on him. Yeah. And like, I can't even, that's been my struggle. Cause I'm like, I kind of agree with that to a degree, but like not the where the numbers are. And that's why I'm struggling on the series, because like my whole thing has been like, I don't really buy Boston, like despite all the numbers and like despite everything, but like I'm watching it and I'm like the numbers not there for me at this point. And like I've tried it a couple different ways, like trying to find a Dallas angle that I really like, and it's very hard for me, I think, pre-flop game one to specifically narrow in on one thing that I like.
Yeah, so I'm kind of with you in terms of how to evaluate this. So I'm a good check for me. I don't use power ratings much in the playoffs because for me, it's much more like I've talked a lot about it. It's matchups, right? But I do think it's a good guiding post for me. And honestly, some of my biggest losses in this postseason have been when I was betting trends and not checking my power rating at all. Mm-hmm. And then later I would go back and be like, why the fuck was I on this side based off of a historical trend when the numbers say that this line is not right? So like, regardless of whether or not like that trend or who wins or who covers, like I knew that price was not accurate if I checked my number, which like I have faith in that number. I've done okay on it this year. I've got, so like as an example, power rating wise for game one. Okay. I've got Dallas at about 4 points of home court value, which is about 2 points over the standard. Okay. And a lot of that's built off of, that's not that the Celtics are this much better than teams. They're not 4 points better on average. That's compared to their overall season number. It's based off of what's their season number, and then what's the differential and how much better they are at home than that season number. And that's about 2 points above league average. 2 points was this, and this is crazy how consistent it's been. 2 point, at least in the regular season, has been pretty consistent the last couple of years, between 2 and 2.5 for home court advantage. I've got the Boston Celtics 4 points better than Dallas on neutral court. Okay. That sounds like a lot, but it's really not, because I have Dallas power rated currently on the same level as the Denver Nuggets to end the season, and on the same level as the Minnesota Timberwolves, and on the same level as the Philadelphia 76ers, with what we like. That was a messy number of like, let's give them Embiid, but not full strength Embiid. And so I had to like kind of tweak that down. But that kind of puts them in there. And like, those are really good teams. Like, those are really good teams that I put them on. Dallas, simply, their power rating the entire season, game to game for 82 games, was so high it needed to be there. Now, I've talked I've jabbered enough about Boston, but that's the reason I bring this up, is to kind of indicate why I'm off on the price. So Brian, Joe kind of said, like, I don't think this price is right. I want to bet Dallas, but I don't think the price is right. You, on the other hand, do think that this is it. Give me the elevator pitch. What's like the biggest reasons why you think that this price should be closer to minus 150 than 225? Or plus 150 to 225.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of reasons, right? There's Boston's path. And I was saying before, like, it's really hard to prepare for a fight without sparring. Dallas is the healthiest team that Boston's going to face by far. Luka Doncic is the best player they will have seen in the playoffs. With respect to the teams that Boston eliminated, I mean, you know how I feel about Bam Adebayo. He's one of my favorite players in the league. But if he's the only guy on the team that's like really good, you're probably not winning much in that series. And in hindsight, I mean, there was no Jimmy Butler, no Terry Rozier. Duncan Robinson was hurt. In the Cavs series, Donovan Mitchell got hurt. Karis LeVert got hurt. Jared Allen didn't play. In the Pacers series, there was no Tyrese Halliburton. We didn't get to see them being the Celtics face the Knicks, who lost I don't know, 90% of their rotation due to
Everyone.
injuries or whatever it was, basically. So like now it's a jump up in competition where everyone on Dallas is healthy with respect to Derek Lively's injury. But it looks like he's going to play. Kristaps Porzingis is a matchup problem. He doesn't appear to be 100%. Like he was asked today before we recorded this whether or not he's 100%, and kind of paused and said we'll see, or some version of that. And I almost think you'd rather have him not play or just play at 100% instead of him playing at like 70-80%. Now it's the playoffs. You could say, hey, nobody's 100%, but you get what I'm saying here. Like, just stick with me for a second. And then with Kristaps Porzingis being out there, yes, he's a matchup problem, but I don't know, when did he become Hakeem Olajuwon? Like, I'm not going to pencil him in for 28 and 10 just because he shows up. Like, I still need to see him go out there and hit shots against this Mavs defense. A defense is going to be very active on the boards with Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford. I think this is a terrible series for Al Horford, potentially, despite the fact that he's going to have the veteran experience there. And then when you look at the sort of like matchup by matchup, since we were talking about matchups, I don't think this is a series that they're going to have a great answer for Luka Doncic either. Now, Boston could be like, hey, Luka could do what he wants, let's guard everybody else. And maybe that's the formula to winning here. But I still think that they're going to shoot like, these were the two, and this has never happened before, actually, in NBA history. These were the two teams that had the two highest three-point attempt rates during the regular season, and they're facing off in the finals. That's never happened in NBA history. So, and Dallas did dip a little bit after the trade deadline because they reshaped their identity, but now they're a better two-way team, which is basically to say if Boston is going to try and play the math, which they have been all season long, and they've been doing it successfully, Dallas is a team that can keep up with that math. They can have some good shooting performances. They have had in the playoffs this year. And I think defensively, their profile is a little bit better than people are giving credit for.
Okay. It's interesting because you still think that they're not getting enough credit. And so much of this about is like
because I think, you know what it is, Matt? I think a lot of the casuals, if you will, they want to see this as like a Luka Doncic only series. Like they're just betting on Luka, which is their bets on Dallas. And and what I'm saying is like, no, I think their team, their nucleus, this being the best supporting cast that Luka Doncic has had, they're underrated. Like their two-way potential is underrated. Like they've proven they can hit shots. They've proven they can close games. They've proven they can defend. And I think that while Boston's better, they're absolutely a better team. But I think Dallas has a higher floor than people are giving credit for as a collective.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I guess the question to kind of float to you, Brian, though, is like, I know the numbers indicate that Boston would be the best team. They've been the best team in the league. Like they're the best team on paper, every single way that you look at it. Is Boston the best team that Dallas would have faced as well? Because like if Boston's the best team that Dallas is going to have faced, I know that they've gotten like better competition, I think, in order to ramp up to like kind of get to this level of performance, right? But if Boston's still better than Minnesota, better than Oklahoma City, better than Los Angeles, then it's like, okay, like this is still another step up in class for Dallas that they have to come to. And like the numbers like have indicated throughout the whole season that Boston is tremendous. And like I still have my reservations on them, but at the same time, like when we look at Dallas, I know Matt, like you've talked a lot about how Dallas has not been like that. Like March is like, like, you know, like whatever, like, you know, you win in March, like great, you know, but, and it showed too, like in the teams that they beat, they only played like one team that was a playoff team. So, you know, like if you kind of like balance the two things, it's like, yeah, like Dallas has done this recently in what I think has been like decent matchups for them, whereas Boston has done it for the course of the whole season. Like, is Boston the best team Dallas has faced? Because then like maybe it doesn't really matter who Dallas has beaten so far coming up to this.
Raheem Palmer had this tweet, former member of the podcast, good friend of mine from the Ringer podcast. For the Ringer Gambling podcast, he asked, what would the perception of Dallas be had you flipped OKC and Minnesota in sequential order? If Minnesota had gotten the 1 and OKC had gotten the 4 or the 3 and beaten Denver. And so if Dallas had stomped through Minnesota on a matchup advantage and then gone 6 in a bunch of tough games with a lot of weird shooting, what does Dallas look like now? Because I am of the opinion that a lot of it is like, who's going to stop this Dallas team? I mean, they beat Minnesota. And I thought Minnesota was really good. And I think Minnesota, I would be on this would be, I would have had Brian on to be like, how are we going to bet Minnesota versus the Boston? That's what we would have done if it had been Minnesota Boston. But that is like, to me, is like part of the sequential order. And Brian, you mentioned the Celtics thing with like X, Y, and again, we're going to get to how to bet Dallas here. You're right that Boston's had an easy road. I think that one of the things I have a problem with is, what are we expecting at this point? Like, I feel like everyone's like, I'm so tired of hearing about Boston. If they're this good, why didn't they sweep and beat every team by 15? And the answer is, if you go back, the 2016 Warriors didn't do that. The 2017 Warriors mostly did, but like the 2018 Warriors didn't do that, right? And nobody has put Boston on those teams' level.
However, their regular season profile and metrics would suggest that they should be in that class, in that territory. And I think that's what people are holding against them.
I agree, except for the fact that in the playoffs, the Boston Celtics are plus 10.8 in net rating.
Yeah. Without Porzingis for most of it.
And this is like a
but
lot
also
of it.
Against whom? Like,
okay. Yeah. But again, it's a double digit. What's a reasonable expectation for who? The question here is whether they could have done anything for you not to feel this way. And I don't think they could have. I think if they were plus 15 and swept, you would still be like, never been tested.
Well, here's the thing. Like, maybe, but I'm not really of the position. I'm not really of the position that they've been super underwhelming throughout their entire playoff run. I'm just pointing out that yes, this is now going to be a big step up in competition.
But that's a known unknown is my thing. It's
I cover boxing, right? Everybody has an inflated record. All the stars have inflated records because when you're coming up and you're 10-0, you're fighting guys typically, unless you had a big amateur career, you're fighting guys who are 13-8, who are 14-5, who are 19-4, who've been knocked out in the past. Like, you beat who's in front of you until you're ready to become the champion. This could be a case where Boston is just beating whoever is in front of them, and then they become the champions anyway. In all likelihood, that's probably what's going to happen according to most people. But like, this is where we are, and I'm not going to hold against them, right, that they still beat these teams and they only lost twice or whatever. But there were some things in those games where it's like, why are you in crunch time against this Pacers team? And while we can give them credit, like, I don't even know what to do with that Pacers series, because you can give them credit for overcoming some of the clutch stuff, quote unquote, but they also did it against Andrew Nembhard and a team that turned the ball over 9 times in 19 clutch minutes in that series. So like, I don't really know what to do with that either. I just think Boston, I just think Dallas would beat Indiana in a series. Dallas would they would beat all those same teams. And Dallas, respectfully, also had a better run in the West, in a tougher conference.
Ooh, I don't agree with that at all. No Kawhi Leonard first round. If we're gonna do this game, we got to start right there.
Oh, but you know, I would have had Dallas regardless, because I don't think Kawhi Leonard is the same.
But
I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying, but like, is Minnesota not better than everyone that Boston beat in the Eastern Conference?
As a team, yes. As a matchup, I genuinely don't think so.
But just as a basketball team,
sure.
Oklahoma City,
sure.
The Clippers, even without Kawhi Leonard.
I don't know, man. That Clippers team looked sad.
Would they beat the Cavs in a playoff series?
No.
I think it's at least debatable. I would probably say yes.
Okay.
But I think it's at least debatable.
So, I mean, this is really what
I don't like the Clippers, by the way. Like, I didn't think they were.
I do think there is an inflated perception of Dallas's run, and I think that's influenced the market here. And I say that off of talking to bookmakers. They're like, well, they beat X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, okay. The other thing I will say is, like, I got an article coming out on this about the bookmakers have pretty much indicated of like, we knew we could get away with this price.
Yeah,
like we don't have to price this the way that we'd have it, because we know people are going to want Dallas because they beat X, Y, and Z, because of all the things that Brian's saying. That doesn't mean Brian's wrong. It just means something for you to consider and do. The way I kind of look at this, honestly, is it's totally fine to bet Dallas. You need to accept you're not, in my opinion, you're betting into a bad number.
Yeah.
Like, it's fine to be like, hey, I still think they're going to win. And if I think they're going to win, but that to me is the difference here, Brian, is you're like, well, I don't know that they're going to win. So, but that does create, here's the difference though, is there are derivatives of that in the other markets that we can find value on. So let's talk about that. The Celtics, the Mavericks, let's do Mavericks. The Mavericks plus 3.5 is minus 800 at BetMGM. Nobody wants to bet 800, but it's probably like, hey, if you want to get, like, they're going to at least lose one game, there's a, whatever the number that you want to get on how much that is. Mavs plus 2.5 is interesting because that's minus 225. Mavs plus 1.5, which is go to game 7 or win the series outright, is minus 125. Again, these markets are telling you what the bookmakers are doing here, where they're like, we're not letting you get any value on Dallas. If you think just for them to force a game 7 or win is minus 125. And then we go to the other side of that, which is Mavs minus 1.5 plus 290, which we'll start that. Well, let's just talk about the pluses real quick on the series line, Brian. Which of those do you feel like has the best value? Plus 3.5 minus 800, plus 2.5 minus 225, or plus 1.5 minus 125?
I think if you're doing plus 1.5, just bet them to win a series at that point. So I would probably say plus 2.5, because if you're doing, like I'm looking at plus 1.5 right now, and that's minus 130 when it's like you can get them at 185 to just win the series. And I feel like if you, in any series, just about, if you feel like a team could win at least 2 games, usually, not all the time, but usually, you can talk yourself into them winning the series if you think they can push to 6 or 7. And this is part of the equation with me with this series. It's like, if I didn't think Dallas could win a road game 7, I would not consider them at all. But part of this to me is because I've seen it happen, but also I think Dallas can win a road game 7 in Boston. I've seen Boston lose at home, and I've seen that. But this is why I think they could win the series, because it's like they can get to that point. I told you in the Slack, I think this is going to be 2-2 after 4 games. I do. This is the
difference between me and Brandon. Brandon's got not 4, 5, 6, 7. I've got not 7, 6, 5, 4. Like, I don't even want to have Boston in 7. If I've already lost all of the money I bet on Boston and we're in a game 7, I'm betting on fucking Luka Doncic. Like, that's where I do not give a shit about all this other stuff. The regular season stuff and the SRS and point differential and historical trends about home teams in game 7. Don't give a fuck. I am not betting on Boston, this Boston team, if they can't take care of this Mavericks team in 6 or less. I'm out. No. Joe, give me your thoughts on the plus numbers first before we go to minus.
So I think if you're looking at the plus numbers, like if you're going to bet on Dallas to win the series, you should just bet on Luka to win MVP. Like, there is no circumstance in my brain that he doesn't win MVP if Dallas wins the series. And I think that that's actually closer in price to like what I think the price should be, right? Because you're getting like plus 225 some places, plus 200s. Like, you're not getting the like plus 180s, plus 170s, like whatever. So I think if you want to bet Dallas and you don't want to lay any games, you need to just bet Luka to be the MVP. I don't hate a look at Dallas minus 1.5 games, to be honest with you, specifically because of the fact that they're going to get a game 6 opportunity at home in Dallas. Boston has been an excellent road playoff team throughout like the last, like whatever it is, 6, 7, 8 years. They've been excellent on the road. However, I still think that there should be, you have to bake in a little bit of home court there, where you're going to say like, all right, like if we get to this spot and Dallas is up 3-2 or whatever it is, 3-2, yeah, 3-2 going to game 6, Dallas is going to be favored. So if you want to buy off of it a little bit, like then you kind of can. So I don't really hate that look either. I don't think I'd want to sell any more games here. I think that that's too much. But to me, and this is another thing that I've kind of struggled with, is that like I don't think a sweep is super likely, but at the same time, the longer the series goes, I want to say that I think it favors Dallas, because maybe that means a Porzingis injury pops up. Maybe that means that Dallas has figured something out, or that there's something that Boston can't solve that Dallas is doing on the court. And those are the kind of the two things that like I think don't favor Boston and would favor Dallas. But at the end of the day, it's like if you play 7 games, the best team probably should win just based on the way the variant should play out. So I don't mind either play on Dallas. I think that honestly, the best way to play this is to wait for game 1 to end, because I'm going to have a lot more certainty and in like what I'm doing. So if I go out there, if I watch game 1, I see Porzingis playing 20 minutes, I'm going to be like, oh wow, this is not the Porzingis that I thought was going to be available for the city or for the season. If Boston wins game 1, I'm going to get a longer price. I know that the trends really like indicate heavily you win game 1, you're going to win the series, but especially if you're the home team. So like I am a little bit nervous about that, but at least I'll have a little bit more certainty if on what Porzingis' status is. I might watch game 1 and be like, nope, I don't want any part of Dallas. Or Dallas wins game 1 and I get the certainty of the win. I get a certainty of a road win, flipping home court, and I understand that maybe Boston kind of comes out hard in game 2 and, I'm giving up a certain amount of my bet in order to get a little bit of game 1 certainty. But I do think that maybe that's the best way to play it, because I'm going to say like, all right, well, now I only need Dallas to win 3 of 6 as opposed to, 4 of 6.
I can't get past that number I pulled. I mentioned on the pod. Teams in the finals specifically that win game 1 on the road are 8-10 in the series. I can't get past that, man.
Yeah,
like,
but the other side is even worse. Like it,
yeah,
I mean, it's
sure.
like it's even more staggering.
If Boston wins game 1,
it's over.
It's not over, but boy, Brian, historically, and like, look, that's the whole thing with Dallas. Dallas is trying to be the first 5 seed to win, the first team with a usage level of Luka Doncic's dribble the air out of the ball and into another universe level player. A team with this level net rating, a team with this level of wins versus the opponent. Like, this is a historical thing that the Mavericks are trying to accomplish here.
Well, they did have a top 5 net rating after the trade for the rest of the season. I think that's how we got.
That's your March, though.
I get it. I see. Well, this is the question.
Because I get what you're saying, because I think every NBA champion has had a top 10 net rating since the second Hakeem Olajuwon Rockets team. But Dallas, after the trade and after reshaping their identity, like, they had a better net rating.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question here. Is like, they're in the finals and they had that net rating, so it's like, see? And my response is more, no, it was fucking March and it doesn't matter. And they got no Kawhi, a Thunder team that doesn't know what it's doing and shot like shit, and then a bad matchup with Minnesota. Like, that's mine.
I think but this is what I'm saying. I think they deserve more credit than that.
But you literally don't think the team that is 12-2 deserves credit for what it did.
Who did they beat?
Andrew Nemhard.
you're just like, but here's my thing though, is like, if we're gonna say like, well, look at the results, we have to give Boston credit.
It's not like the Minnesota series was, they got hot in game 7 or whatever. They beat their ass.
Well, no, like, that's actually not true. Most of those games were in clutch time. Like,
yeah, and they beat their ass in clutch time. Like, that matters.
Okay, that's another question here, because like, clutch time, the big thing is like, is it real or not?
Because like the point differential was like nothing.
You know who's also like dominant? You know who's also dominant in clutch time? The Denver Nuggets. Guess what they did? They lost 3 times in clutch time to the. Well,
to your matchup point, Denver's the worst matchup for like Minnesota. You said this. Minnesota's built to beat Denver. Mm-hmm. And Dallas is more improvisational.
No, Dallas is literally built to beat Minnesota. Like, that's how, like, their construct, and that's I mean, we talked about this on the first on the big prod, but I don't think Dallas is built to beat Boston. I do want to ask this question though. So we've got that, and then so I'm going to present you 2 options here, Brian. And then Joe will get to yours. Mavericks -1.5, so to win in 6 or less is +290. -2.5, so to gentlemen sweep them, which imagine the joy in your heart having this ticket and being right at plus 600.
I would laugh about it though.
And Mavs -3.5 to sweep the Boston Celtics, who you think are fraudulent and haven't played anybody except Andrew Nemhard, who is apparently like one of the worst players in the NBA, is plus 2,500.
I like Andrew Nemhard.
That's like your set here, right? Okay, so we got those options.
Yeah.
This is if I'm right, it goes way the other way and Boston falls apart. Now, here's a more reserved, because you did start with, I do think Boston should be favored. You're
Yes,
basically like,
1,000%.
look, I
Yeah.
think Boston should win, but it's going to be hard, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Over
That's fair.
5.5 games is minus 165.
That's so
7
much.
games is 225.
Mm.
So you can either
What
do
am I choosing
Dallas
between?
gets the edge and beats them outright in fewer than 7 games or in 7 games. Or you can just do it's going to be a long series no matter what. And you have to pay a little bit for 6 or more.
Yeah.
And you get a good bump at plus 225 if you're like, the Mavs are at least winning 3, and I will give Boston enough credit to make it to game 7.
I mean, it's logical. If you're someone like me who thinks this is going to be a longer series than people probably anticipate, because I think a lot of people, sharp bettors in particular, are probably looking at, again, Celtics in 5, because this is what the playoffs have been for them so far. And I think Dallas is, again, better than what they've seen. I think over 5.5 is probably good. I don't love it at minus 165. I wish it were like a better number than that. But I think this is going to be a 6 or 7 game series. So therefore, and by the way, I told you I think Dallas could win a road game 7. I think Boston could win a road game 6 if they're ahead 3-2.
Yep.
Boston, you put out the numbers, Joe. Like, Boston's been a great road team. They also, until this playoff series, since the 2021 playoffs, haven't been a great home team in the playoffs. Like, this year is a little bit different. They, again, the competition level, whatever. But they were like under 500 the last 3 playoffs before this one at home, you know? And now, like, I know Kristaps Porzingis, he's going to reshape their entire offense and all of a sudden be Dirk Nowitzki in this series. But, like, you know, I just think that this is good. I do think this is going to be, I'd be surprised if this wasn't a 6 or 7 game series. So I do like the over 5.5 there.
I do want to know. I said I don't think Porzingis is vital. I think they can win without Porzingis. They can lose with him, but I think they can win without Porzingis. I think the bigger thing is his impact on the entire thing. Like, that's what a lot of this gets down to. Is like, this is if you think that this is Luka and Kyrie, and I guess all the great players that Brian Fonseca thinks with Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington and Derek Jones Jr.
Hey, they're good role players. They're
good.
Players.
They are. You know who's also a really good role player? Al Horford. Al Horford's a really
but I
hope he doesn't have to play a lot because he's going to get cooked in this.
Well, okay, so here's the thing.
This is a good series.
He might get cooked, but I'll tell you this: they're not going to leave him on an island as much, and their offense is still going to hum if he's hitting threes.
Yeah. By the way, I love Al Horford. There's a Dominican flag behind me.
I hear you.
You know what I mean? My girlfriend's Dominican, not me.
It's okay.
But
it's all right. Hey, everybody's a traitor sometime. It's fine.
Well, I'm Puerto Rican, so we got a friendly rivalry with Al Horford's people. But yeah,
can't wait for our international pods.
we don't got Matt. We don't got a lot of Latinos in the NBA or covering the NBA for that matter. So I like Al Horford.
My favorite Al Horford is that he was an all-star. The first time he was an all-star, no one sat at his press table. No one. So crazy. I sat there and I talked to him about Spanish poetry for 20 minutes, and it is one of my favorite conversations of my entire life.
That's awesome.
Big Pablo Neruda fan, Al Horford.
That's awesome.
Joe, would you rather bet, because like ROI, right?
Yeah.
Brandon's about to break through this wall like the Kool-Aid man and be like, why are you not betting Mavericks minus 2.5 plus, you know, on that kind of thing. Although he's been betting way more of the minus numbers lately. Over 5.5 minus 165, or Dallas minus 1.5 or plus or minus 2.5.
I think I'd rather bet the. This is tough. I would rather bet the over 5.5. Because I think that the most likely outcome is Boston wins, but if Dallas wins, I don't think it's short. So I think that it kind of covers my bases both ways. And like, I don't think it's going to be a sweep. So like, I'm really just saying like, I don't think Boston's going to win in 5. Like that's really kind of the position that I'm, going to put my flag in there.
This is a really quick question. Is there any chance that there's a finals MVP who is not Luka Doncic to the Dallas Mavericks win the title, Brian?
I have to give Kyrie Irving a 10% chance.
Okay.
Just because, like, I mean, I'm going to write about this for Action Network leading up to the playoffs, but like, I do want to talk through in that piece. Is it worth betting on revenge? This is not shaping up to be like a great series for him schematically because like Drew Holiday, Derek White, on switches, there's going to be length, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. But I mean, like, I don't care what he's on in terms of like, whether it's like whatever ayahuasca, I don't care what it is. I'm sure he wants to kill those motherfuckers. Like, I'm
I
sure
don't.
of it. In
He
Boston,
may want to kill the franchise, but he loves those guys and they love him. They're
oh,
still
that's
really
no.
close.
I'm talking about the team, like not like the
I think he wants to kill the
individual.
fans.
Right? Yes, yeah, the individual player. Like
I think he
he's
wants
gonna
to stomp on
come
the
out.
logo.
He's gonna come out and like I do expect we'll have at least a couple of Kyrie Irving games. But no, to answer your question, I think it'll be Luka Doncic.
Brian just guesstimated 10%. His implied odds at 18-1 at BetMGM are 5.26. So that tells you there's like that's pretty good value.
Yeah, I really do struggle. I just struggle to see it. Like I don't see like a great path for them to win without Luka scoring like 35 a game with like 10 and 10 on the back end. So
Luka,
it's just
like I mean that's a lot. I mean I'll say this: if you told me Kyrie's how can I put this? If you told me that Kyrie's chances were higher, I would say that I'm trying to think how to put this. What I'm basically trying to say is I think there's a much better path if Kyrie is the MVP than if Luka is. I think Luka can have 35, 10, and 10 and they get stomped.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, because but also to that point, what would Kyrie's line have to be? Like it has to be 30 plus, but it might need to be even more than that if we think Luka's going to have like a good series.
Yeah. Plus 2. So the series price is plus 180. Luka's plus 200. If you want Dallas, just bet Luka. You can bet Kyrie if you need to. If you like put a huge bet in on Luka and Kyrie has a monster game 1 or game 2, you're still going to get Kyrie at a pretty short or it's pretty long.
He's still going to be at least 10-1. Like there's no. He's going to have. He's going to have to have like some crazy games.
So
like
if you want to bet Dallas on the series price, you definitely need to just bet them plus 200. I do think that
Kyrie would need to have like legitimately multiple 40-point games
and buzzer beaters.
I do think
probably
I do think that probably the best bet we've kind of come out of this with is over 5.5 games minus 165. Like that's not a lot of juice. That's a pretty good number. And like that means you can win like Boston in 6. That means you don't have to worry about game 7. All you're literally saying is neither one of these teams is going to beat the other one in 5. No sweeps. Can't beat them in 5. And given that Boston hasn't done that versus inferior competition and Dallas hasn't done that at all. So I guess technically no, they did that versus the Wolves. But yeah, like that to me seems like we agree that's kind of the best bet that we got on the board for Dallas is over 5.5 games minus 165.
Definitely. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
I would love to, if I could find it anywhere, I would love to see what the number is on series 2-2 after 4 games.
They'll have those up eventually. Those will come up before.
I see 2-1 Dallas or 2-1 Boston after 3. I see a lot of after 3 games at a couple different books. I would love to see 2-2 after 4 games, see what the number is, because I told you I could very much see the splitting both in Boston and in Dallas, and then we have a best of 3 to end it.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, that's Brian Fonseca and Joe Dolera. Up next, Michael Fiddle and I'll break down how to bet the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals. Michael Fiddle, you can find him on Twitter in the Action Network app at Fiddle's Picks. He's also on the Advantage Sports Betting podcast. Mike, thanks for joining me. Let's talk a little bit about Boston. Let's first give me the elevator pitch for why you both like Boston to win the series and also why you like the price with where it's at in the market.
I like Boston to win the series because they're a 60-plus win team with a top 5 net rating of all time. They appear to be fully healthy. We just got the word from Shams that Kristaps Porzingis is going to be active for Game 1. We've seen him in full practices. We've seen him shooting. And I think that the way that the Boston offense tries to score is the exact opposite of what Dallas Mavericks try and stop. The Boston Celtics do not try and get to the rim. They are, I think, second in the league in offense, but 29th at scoring at the rim. So they are going to shoot a high volume of threes. It becomes a math game where you're valuing true shooting percentage. So give me the Boston Celtics in that situation against the Dallas Mavericks. I understand PJ Washington, Jarek Jones Jr., they've had some great games. The Mavericks attack the corner 3 very well. I think Jason Tatum will be in that dunker spot to close out against that. And I think ultimately I trust the Boston shooters a lot more than I do the Dallas side.
What would you make this series price?
I projected it. So I don't have a model, but I am so good at reading the market and I have a freak level memory. So I remember where every other game was priced of these teams relative. I remember how they've been trending. I know how they've been priced throughout the playoffs. That's just something that bodes well for me, is to start tracking all this and storing it in my mental database. So I was thinking, based on prices that we've seen throughout the season, based on the way that teams have been steamed in various situations, that it would be Boston Celtics -7 and then bet out to -7.5 as the closing line. So when it came out at -5.5, I thought to myself two things. One, I should have probably better expected a 5.5 based on the -225 series price. I'm sure there's a way that you could correlate series price to what game one home advantage would be, to correlating into a projected point total, so or spread total. So given that it was 5.5, I immediately bet it for my max exposure. We've seen Boston take steam in every series. We've seen the Wolves take steam. We've seen the Thunder take steam. We've seen the Clippers take steam. So the market has been fading the Mavericks quite often, and the market has been backing the Boston Celtics. So I had a strong feeling that would be the case again in the finals now. And there's been a lot of public money coming in on the Mavericks, and all the sharp people that I track, that I follow, that I believe in, that I subscribe to, that I'm like to sit with at the table, they're all on Boston's side saying the number should be -8, saying that the series price should be around -350. So for me, it feels like an absolute gift to get Celtics -5.5. I even have Celtics title odds that I'm like, I can't even initiate a hedge. I was planning the whole time to hedge, but I can't even initiate a hedge on and take some Mavericks because I see zero value in Mavericks, and I see more value in still taking Celtics, and I'm even willing to let myself be a little bit overexposed here.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the issue I'm running into too. Is just like, if Boston loses game one, I'm going to be tempted to go back in on Boston, and then I'm like, I don't know if I want to chase. I don't want to like chase good money with bad money with good. I don't want to do that. I do think we talked about this on Buckets Live, and I think it's worth mentioning. The look ahead price at one book for this series when Dallas was up 2-0 on Minnesota was -280. And then we open here at 225.
Because that game 3 that the Dallas took over Minnesota made there be such an overreaction to the market, and it dropped from 280 to 200. And me and you were messaging on the side like, we missed the moment to properly hedge.
And it's wild to me that, I'll say this, that look ahead price assumed Dallas would win. So it doesn't matter if Dallas won in 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. That doesn't have any sort of implication, or shouldn't have any sort of implication, on what that series price should be. And instead, this is where I kind of get to is, like you said, they win game 3 and all of a sudden it's like, oh man, Dallas is way better than we expected. And I'm like, are they? Like, if we knew that they were going to win after they were up 2-0, we did. We knew, like, nobody's ever, like, it doesn't happen very often that you come back from 2-0 after going down 0-2 on the,
and they went home.
Right. That doesn't happen. So, like, if we knew that was going to be the case, that should have been factored in anyway. Like, you can't expect that series to go any longer than 5 when Dallas goes up 2-0 on the road. And so that number, and you can just say, like, well, the look ahead, and I'm okay with this. The look ahead number, if you want to say, like, well, that look ahead number was wrong. That look ahead number was a bad price on Dallas. I don't remember what the Dallas price was, but the look ahead price
plus 240, Matt.
Plus 240. So that tracks the 40 cents. That's okay to say. It's like, oh, well, no, that was too long. Dallas should not be plus 240 on the look ahead line. I fundamentally, like, you have to think one or the other. You either have to think that the -280 that one book hung on Dallas in a look ahead series versus the Mavericks was wrong, -280, -240, or that the current price, which we have at BetMGM in the market, -225 plus 180, is wrong. And I'm with Fiddle that I think that the current number is wrong.
My only alternative to this, Matt, is something that we discussed a while back during Knicks Pacers, is maybe these books know that they have a higher liability on the Boston side, so they're expecting Mavericks money to come in because people are inevitably going to hedge long futures. So are they just dipping a Mavericks price? But then I also go the other way, being like, no, because that's going to invite smart money back in on Boston. It's just going to push the line back out. So why is this line kind of not moving and staying stagnant there? Have they just laid the perfect number where Boston backers aren't double dipping in Boston, but they're also not buying into Mavericks, kind of like what I'm doing.
So one bookmaker told me they don't have anything on Dallas. Like Dallas liability is not influencing this at all. But there's a perception of Boston squeaking by a Pacers team lacking Halliburton and Dallas looking impressive recently. We're expecting Dallas support, which we've seen at the plus 180. That's from a sharp bookmaker. That they priced this because they were expecting Dallas to take money on the series price. What I think is funny is we always talk about this, like which kind of money, right? And it's very clear that game one, like we're tracking that in the Action Network app, that 70% of the tickets, 70+% of the money is on Dallas in game one at 6.5. When this opened at 5.5, it goes to 6.5, and it hasn't moved any further back or forward because they've reached a tension point between public and sharp money. That's where like those two forces are at a standstill and tug. That the public is like, give me Luka Doncic. Hell yeah, this Boston team's overrated. And the sharps are like, we'll take the better team as only a 6.5 point favorite here. Based off of, like I said, what number you have it at? I think I've heard 7.5. I have an 8. I'll say I have an 8. I might be light a little bit on Dallas. Like I might need to upgrade Dallas by like a half point and get this to 7.5. That's still a full point of value for game one, which we'll talk about tomorrow on the pod. Let's talk about how to bet them though. So the minus 225 price, I think is totally fine to bet. I think that's totally okay. Agreed. Fiddle and I gave out like, hey, you can get a minus 200 right now. And like, I bet them minus 200 on those look ahead lines. Let's talk about outcome though, because the conclusion that Joe Delera and Brian Fonseca and I reached on how to bet the Mavericks was that the best bet, if you like Dallas, is over 5.5 games at minus 165, which gives you all sorts of outs. Boston can still win in 6 or 7, but it says that Dallas will win 2 games to be able to get this to a game 6 and force it that way so that Dallas will at least be competitive in this series. So over 5.5 games at minus 165 for Boston to at least be in position. So either, no matter how the only way you lose is if Dallas or Boston wins short. My question for you is, we like Boston so much here. Celtics minus 1.5 is plus 105. You get a plus number at that at minus 1.5. Minus 2.5 is plus 175. Minus 3.5 for the sweep is 5-1, 500. We'll talk about those outcomes first. What's like the stopping point if you're doing an escalator on how this goes? Is there a point where you're like, I do not think there's value on Boston to sweep? Or is it simply, if you like Boston as much as we do, you should bet all outcomes on the escalator?
It's a very interesting thought process. I don't think I'm going to give you a right versus wrong answer, more of just my approach style. Okay. I'm totally fine paying juice, and I don't necessarily need to seek endless escalators. So I do like to play lines closest to plus or minus 100. So I would do the minus 225 in terms of the Boston series. I actually just like playing game one at like minus 230 you could find in the market. So I'd rather just play 5 extra cents for game one, get the money back, and then be able to roll it over again, as opposed to playing anything in a series. But if you're going to play series spread, I do like that minus 1.5 hovering around that plus, what do you say, plus 105?
Yeah, plus 105. So let's talk a little bit.
A lot of my rules.
So let's talk about a little bit about this. Okay, so you're comfortable betting, and you've proven that time and time again with a number of big money lines that you've played on in terms of playing the juice on it. And I think that's all well and good. But I do think that if we're looking at this from a game flow perspective, these markets that I really like, these series spreads, we could admit that some outcomes are more likely than others, and that you can have a very strong indication of which way the series is directionally leaning, which leads you to Boston minus 225. But if they're going to win, it is more likely that they win so like the market essentially says the most likely outcome is Celtics in 6. That's like the most likely outcome here, right? And even that's like a plus 105, which I think is an indicator of, again, where Dallas is at. Because like on these series spreads, the most likely outcome is that Dallas does not get swept. The second most likely is that Dallas wins at least 2 games. The third most likely is that Dallas wins at least 3 games. That's minus 125, mind you. Like, again, Dallas to force game 7 or win is a minus 125.
That's crazy.
For a series in which they are not favored to win.
We are going to have a lot of shooting variance. Just the way that the Celtics play, like they want to shoot threes and they're willing to allow you to shoot threes too. It's a way for them to set their defense behind you. So they think they have better shooters, which they do. So for that reason, I do think playing into sweeps, I mean, you could just say, if there's so much variability, give me the team at 5-1 odds with the better shooters. Or you can go the other way and say, well, there's bound to be one regression game where Boston shoots below average, and one game where, you know, the Mavericks and PJ Washington go 7 for 11 again on those corner threes.
So the exposure here, I think, is if you bet Celtics minus 1.5 plus 105, right? You're getting 4, you're getting 5, you're getting 6. You're only missing out on Boston in 7. And I said this to them, and this is like the hole in all of my. Go ahead.
You would have Mavericks plus money in Boston game 7 if you feel any differently about it at that time. Or you could then add going into game
6.
Well, no, because you'd have lost that ticket. Yeah. Never mind.
Right. No, but I think it's Celtics minus 1.5. What you can do is at the plus 105, if you just want to get out, if you're just like, I don't like how this is going, I want to get out, you have plus 105 to play against Dallas. Dallas will be favored, but you'll be able to
very light.
And like, again, Brandon talked about this. He does this on the Cash That podcast with Joe Delaire. You can check out on Joe's feed. But like, talked about how, like, what's the point in doing all this if you're just going to hedge out and take zeros? I think it's mostly a matter of, if you take Celtics minus 1.5 because your prior lean is that Boston is going to take care of business in 6 or less, and you don't get home, game 6 does provide you an opportunity to be like, I'm out, right? You don't have to just dump it. You can at least be okay on that. I want to ask you this. Do you have your projections up by chance?
I can get them. Yeah.
Okay. If you can get your projections up, what I want to know is what you have the line for Boston in Dallas for a potential games 3, 4, or what the baseline would be for 3, 4, 6. That's what I'm trying to figure out here.
So we've learned through home court pricing in both of these conferences. We've seen it dwindle throughout the playoffs, where it's been less of a factor moving forward. So in round 1, it was like an 8-point swing. By round 3, it's been closer to a 5-point swing. So I'm going to, baked into my finals odds, I have it closer to a tighter swing in terms of home court advantage. So I think it almost becomes a pick'em, or maybe Dallas minus 1 in Dallas's home court.
So my problem is that Dallas was an unimpressive squad at home this season. So my home court advantage for them is very, very small based off of the model projection. And I don't think I necessarily need to feel like I need to change that, because Dallas has not been great at home. They've been better on the road than at home in the playoffs. So even though I think some of those numbers, it's like small sample and wonky, etc., I don't feel like I need to adjust that. So like, I still have the Dallas Mavericks as dogs at home. And if somebody... Go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree with that. Like, I don't like the fact that I think it's going to be Dallas Mavericks minus 1, minus 1.5. I will be all over Boston again in those situations, because we've seen Boston close as, what were they, even a 1-point favorite in Denver? Did they close at?
Yeah.
So why are they now dogs in Dallas when Dallas is a worse home team, and we know Denver's got one of the stronger home court advantages? Right. It makes no sense. Like, I would price it personally, and I would play it to Dallas minus 1.5, because it probably should be Dallas minus 2 in Boston, but we're going to get it the other way.
So I love this conversation.
I mean Boston minus 2, sorry.
So I love this conversation. We have like an active convo going in our action Slack about this, because so much of it just comes down to better by better, how you feel about the market. So what Fiddle's proposing here is, if Boston was minus 1 in Denver, there's no way they can be plus 1 in Dallas. So the response to that, though, is you can say, again, one of those numbers has to be wrong, right? And the response, I think, is very fair one, is to say Dallas lost that game in Denver, right? So Boston shouldn't have been minus 1 in Denver. But I think from Fiddle and I's perspective, and I agree with him on this, there's no way that the bookmakers should have adjusted things so much that now Dallas is minus 1, minus 2 at home. There's no way for whatever adjustment you would have to make. That doesn't make any sense based off of what we've seen. with no significant injury differentials to totally reshape the squad. There's even if you're like, well, because that game in Boston was in Denver was after the trade deadline. But even if you want to say, like, what you would then have to say is that this 31-9 team for the Dallas Mavericks after the trade deadline, when they added PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford and got healthy, that's an important note here. They were not healthy before that point either. They got Derek Lively back. They got DJJ. They got healthy. Kyrie too. That team, though, you'd have to say is then, if they're -1, if they're +1 in Dallas, that would mean that you would have to say that the Mavericks are 2 points better than Denver on neutral. And if you're like, Denver got knocked out in the second round by a team that Dallas beat the brakes off of. So yeah, I think that that's accurate. That's totally fine. You can bet Dallas. If that's where you're at, you should bet Dallas, right? Like, if nothing else, you're saying that the Dallas price is correct. But that's how you have to think about these things I go the other game on this, actually, Michael, which is the Celtics were -7.5 versus Denver full strength in Boston.
I remember. Denver won, but I remember.
So Denver is +7.5 in Boston. In game 1, Dallas is 6.5, which tells us again, and then they open 5.5, right? At 5.5 at the open number, that tells us that the books are now giving a power rating where this Dallas team is 2 points better than a Denver team that was the favorite to win the Western Conference and a short dog to win the title at the time of that meeting. And that's where I'm like,
it makes no sense to me, and
yeah.
It makes me love Boston. And the way that I judge, okay, how do you know which one is wrong, right? How do you choose which game was the outlier and which game the market got wrong and the people got right? For me, I will always value the previous closing line versus the next opening line, because we will see it steam in the subsequent opening line. So if Dallas opens game 3 as a -2, there's going to be tons of Boston money that comes into the market because we saw how the previous game steamed. So even if you don't agree with where it went, you can understand the direction that it moved as something very important for future games. So I'm probably going to be on Boston every single game this series, which makes me go back and think, yeah, I probably should be playing the 5-1 escalator and throw out some of my rules. Totally overexposed in my Boston positions that I don't know if I want to add on more.
So I bet Celtics series price -225. I took Celtics -1.5, and I took Celtics -2.5. And I am completely understanding of Brian Fonseca's argument of like, come on, Dallas is going to win too. Boston couldn't sweep these teams without their star players, but this is not those teams. Dallas is winning at least 2. I would agree, but I'm actually not saying that that's going to happen. I'm saying that's going to happen more often than +175 suggests. That's the way to consider how I bet that is. I don't have to think that this is going to happen. I have to think that this is going to happen more times than what the market suggests that it will. And I don't have as big of a play on -2.5. I'm not like, this is the best bet, is like, they're going to definitely, no, like Boston's probably going to win this in 6 is like, if you ask me to go ahead, which is why for me, it's like, Boston's probably going to win this in 6. The number is +105. I get myself a nickel. Like that's the edge that I've got on this. Is I think that they are more likely to win in 6 than not. So I've got at least a nickel of value. Let's talk Finals MVP. 1, do you like this market?
Yes.
Okay, so you like this market. If you like this market, what do you think is the best way to bet Finals MVP if you like the Boston Celtics?
So I have 2 thoughts on this. I actually really like the Tatum prices. I think the Jaylen Brown prices after the Eastern Conference Finals are way too short, and that's the reason why we're getting better value on Jason Tatum. I think from a basketball strategic and tactical thing of what we're going to see on the court, Tatum's going to be in that closeout spot, in the dunker spot on defense, shadowing either PJ Washington or Derek Jones Jr. It is going to be Jaylen Brown who takes a lot of turns on Luka. Whether or not it's Drew Holiday with the first attack or Jaylen, there's going to be a lot of Jaylen Brown time on Luka, and I don't think Jaylen Brown's going to end up winning a defensive MVP type of award for shutting down Luka Doncic, because there is no shutting down Luka Doncic, right? He's still going to get his, and he's going to make Jaylen Brown work a lot harder on the defensive end. On offense, We know the Dallas Mavericks are going to let you shoot threes. Tatum, probably the slightly better three-point shooter. And also, if he's going to drive and kick so much because Dallas is going to be sitting people in the paint, I expect his assist numbers to be pretty high too. So I think his rebound numbers are going to be good because he's going to be in the dunker spot. I think his assist numbers are going to be high because they're going to sit in the paint against him, and Boston's loaded with shooters around it. Probably expect him to be the main scorer anyways. So I'm expecting a condensed stat set for Jason Tatum, and the fact that Jaylen Brown has the narrative train coming into it from the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, that I think there's great value on Tatum. I think at minus 115 is the best odds you can find in the market. But I also am willing to go one step further if you'll let me, Matt.
Well, let's go back on that because let's I want to rebut because sure. I bet last night I bet Jaylen Brown plus 625, and that was not based off of Western Conference Finals MVP. I'd actually already bet Jaylen Brown's Western Conference Finals MVP in some parlays as well before all this, because I've kind of maintained that I think Jaylen Brown has been the best Boston Celtic this season. I think if you look over the course of the season, you'll be like, the box numbers are not going to add up, but the way that they have played, and especially in the big games, you'll be like, man, Jaylen Brown was great in that game. Jaylen Brown also pairs best with Kristaps Porzingis. Those two, for whatever reason, from training camp on, have had terrific chemistry. And I do think that the fact that Jaylen was able to win Western Conference Finals MVP and is a point within Tatum in scoring, he's less in rebounds, obviously, and less in assists. But the fact that he was able to be within range and scoring without Kristaps is very promising, because I think Kristaps' presence improves Jaylen Brown's ability to do these things and to be able to generate assists. I think that the Dallas Mavericks will load up on Jason Tatum. I think it's going to be PJ Washington or Derrick Jones Jr. with help defenders shaded to that side. And they're going to put a lot of pressure, and they're going to try and force Jason Tatum into a low efficiency, what are you doing, dumb series. And that can definitely work in their favor, to be perfectly honest with you. It's not that I don't think Tatum is great. There are matchups where I think Tatum would smash. This just doesn't happen to be one of them. I think on the weak side, though, Jaylen, if you shade all that area, all that attention towards Tatum, you're saying we're more okay with Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown ripped Kyrie Irving to shreds defensively in the regular season matchup. Kyrie's been better defensively. This is not a good matchup for him because Jaylen's so much bigger. You're right that Jaylen's going to get a lot of time on Luka. I don't know. I'm really curious to see game one, because I don't know how much Luka is going to be like attack it versus try and get the switch off.
To Derek White endlessly.
Or Drew, to be perfectly honest with you. He tears up Drew just as much. He wants those smaller guys on him. So how much do they do that? Do they deny that? Is Jaylen Brown go through the screen because it's harder to screen effectively with Kyrie? Like those kind of mechanisms, if Boston doesn't just be like, we'll just give you the switch, we're just going to give you whatever you want. If they don't do that, and they might do it for game one and then adjust as the series goes on. If they don't do that, though, it makes it a little bit harder on Luka. What I do think, though, is I don't necessarily think that guarding Luka outside of foul trouble, which is a concern for me, that guarding Luka is going to wear down Jaylen to where he's not effective. He's in great condition. He's well rested. His offensive role also isn't like Luka's, where it's like dribble, 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 bang, 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 dribble, 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 shoot. Like that's not what Jaylen Brown does. So as a secondary playmaker, he fills in gaps. And that to me allows him to be really effective. So I think there's good value at plus 625. I have some Tatum tickets from earlier, which again, I'm simply trying to be honest about the fact of if I didn't have those Tatum tickets, I would be betting Tatum probably a little bit as well, with Brown as kind of my long shot. What's the one step further you want to go?
The one step further would be I'm actually okay with adding Luka to a Tatum and Luka portfolio and
loser MVP.
Where you're just taking both sides. If you can't decide, if you like Dallas in the series, but you've noticed all of the Boston steams and you respect the market and you're just like, I don't want to go contrarian. I think there's a nice ability to play both of them. I think the best you can find in the market for Luka's plus 210 and Tatum minus 115. So if you pair those two odds appropriately, you can use an arbitrage calculator on Action Network. You're not actually arbitraging these lines, but what you're doing is you're essentially cornering the market. So you could use an arbitrage formula to know how to stake your weights of your bets to lead to equal return, but it generates a 17% ROI if either of those two wins, if it's Tatum or Luka who wins MVP. And then I just think on the Dallas side, the same way that I said with Tatum, Luka's stat set is going to be so condensed. I know there's a Kyrie narrative around being back in Boston, but I think it's pretty outlandish to think Kyrie Irving could win a finals MVP over Luka in the way that the Mavericks pile up their statistics. So I would always take the Luka plus 210 and get the 22 cents better on the series, on the finals MVP than plus 188 on the series price. So I actually would take Luka plus 210, Tatum minus 115, and say this is a classic ROI versus EV and expected hit rate situation. Is there a higher than 83% chance that Luka and or Tatum win finals MVP? Or, because two people can't win, so I don't know why I said and ultimately I think yes. And you could play into, I don't really have an opinion on the series or the games, I just want a position on the 2-star players.
The only other name I will mention, I guess this is like I will be like, hey, I said this thing and didn't bet it, win here. But well, I was doing some film work last night, diving into some stuff, and I am a little bit concerned about Derek White for finals MVP. And the reason is, if they're going to leave a shooter open, Derek White was in a lot of the trigger actions that I saw Dallas leaving open in the regular season matchups. That if you kind of break down what Dallas is going to allow, Derek White shoots a lot of those shots. Derek White's also a really good passer. Derek White's also, it's possible that Derek White has a really good defensive series on Kyrie. Like, there are, if effectively the Derek White argument is Jalen has an okay series, Jason Tatum has a bad series, the Celtics win anyway. And if you're like, that doesn't sound very likely, well, how likely does it sound? Because the question is whether or not it's more or less likely than 30-1 at BetMGM, which is 3.23% of the time. So if you think that happens more than 3% of the time, it technically has value. I'm not going to bet it, but it is something that rattled around in my head that Derek White's going to have some opportunities.
White had, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good.
He had 3 unbelievable games in Miami against that Miami series, right? Like, he was dominant. Do you think he would have won MVP of the Miami series?
I honestly don't remember, Fiddle. I've tried to block out that series from my mind.
Okay. Yeah, because this was the same concern that I had, is what if this is a huge Derek White series? Yeah. Because I did notice the same things as you. And when you mentioned Jalen plays a lot better with Porzingis, I feel the same way about Derek White. They often go to Derek White, Porzingis pick and rolls in like some, fourth quarter tight situations where Jason kind of clams up a bit. So if they go to those Derek White sets and he's playing well, but ultimately I went back to that Miami series and looked at some of the stats. I still think Tatum would have gotten that MVP, and that was like an unbelievable. Derek White was like 20 for 35 from 3. He was 30 points a game, 7 threes a game, and was raining them in. I still think it would have went to Tatum again, because the more diversified but yet still condensed stats.
Okay, that's how to bet the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals. My thanks to Brian Fonseca and Joe Delera helping me out on the Mavs side. My thanks to Michael Fiddle helping me out on the Celtics side. We'll be back tomorrow, Game 1. Best bets for the NBA Finals. After Game 1, Buckets Live. Just confirm that, by the way. Buckets Live on Thursday. We'll probably start, we might start mid-game. So be on the lookout for that. Keep the notifications on youtube.com/The Action Network. My thanks to David Payne, our producer extraordinaire, who's done a yeoman's work this week dealing with all the blabber I put out, as well as Hutton Jackson, the video crew, getting us up on youtube.com/The Action Network. We'll see you guys again next time. Thanks for joining us. Till then, let's get buckets.